that's to get everybody involved, to get as many people hooked on the drug. I mean, it's like giving drugs out for free to get everybody, especially at young age. Almost every addictive substance, including social media, is introduced as young as possible. So Instagram kind of has had this limit of 13 years old, which has been easy to get around by lying about your age, creating an account. So you're getting 10, 11, 12-year-olds.
Is that when somebody experiences burnout, are they can no longer get the high off of that, or is it the low is so bad that they come off of that? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, a good way to think of it is to think of the dopamine baseline. So your brain is operating pretty much all hormones and all neurotransmitters at some kind of baseline. So
Hey, welcome back. This is DJ Potter and David Aderzada with the Hairy Knuckle. And we're here with Spencer Anderson, who is a BYU professor, correct?
kind of. BYU lecturer.
Lecturer. Okay.
Is there a difference? Like, what's the...
Professors tend to be research.
That's right.
Half research, half teaching.
Right.
So it's and I'm teaching a non-credit class that people come when they want to, depending on their availability and the subject.
Okay.
Cool.
Interesting. And what is your specialization or your area of study that you focus on?
I try to address pressing issues that college kids are facing these days. So mental health, self-improvement, study habits in general, how to make and break habits, relationship issues. And it's called Master Your Mind because a lot of the dynamics that we deal with psychologically manifest themselves in school, under pressure, and especially in relationships. That's kind of the culmination of when all our kind of baggage comes to play. And so Master Your Mind was originally meant to address kind of a mental health resource shortage that was blowing up on college campuses everywhere, and especially BYU, because their counseling services were backed up for 3 months.
Oh, wow.
And so I was trying to provide psychoeducation for students that needed urgent help just to kind of survive the pressures of college life. But the more I researched, the more I saw that a lot of these issues were manifesting in relationships, either not having them and then dating issues, but also all the stress that was around picking spouses and marriage.
So is this a program that you created, or is it like the university created in your...
So I started it in one department.
Oh, wow.
And then we had about 40 students that showed up to the first lecture. And then it grew by about 10 students a week, 10 to 15. So I started it 2 years ago, started at 40. And then the last one I did was about 450.
Wow.
So it steadily grew, and we just continually had to find bigger and bigger rooms. And the demand for dating advice was really interesting because I remember getting some comments that were, everybody's telling us to date and get married, but nobody's telling us how to do it, which was really interesting. So I kind of took that as a personal mission of, I've kind of got the mindset of a teenager still. You know, I'm 50, but I still think like a kid. And so I'm like,
I certainly do.
I can get in their world and provide a mature research back perspective and try to merge the two. So,
right. So from our perspective, in creating Aura, right, it's a values-based dating app that we started. From our perspective, the unique issues and problems that young people have currently in dating, these are completely of the last 15 years. These are very unique. You know, when I was younger, in my early 20s didn't have these issues. I know my parents didn't. What are those issues? So what makes this generation, specifically Gen Z, so unique in that they seem like they're struggling very much so with regard to dating?
There's probably 50 variables that go into that. I wholeheartedly agree with you that it is a unique challenge that they face. I think one of the major issues is what's called in the literature as paradox of choice. Is everybody has almost too many choices, and so they want to perfect that choice because they always think, oh, there's got to be one better. And when you talk about the dating realm, it's just one swipe away from a better match
on a swipe-based app.
Yeah. And so not only are you dealing with all the people you can meet in real life, but also on social media, and then add the digital aspect of a dating app that there's thousands, and you're not limited to your small town of 300 or 5,000 or 10,000. It's not only it's your county, it's your state, now it's worldwide.
But who has that problem though? The optionality. Which specific individuals, are they men? Are they women? Are they specific types of men? Are they specific types of women? Because I don't think it's something that is across the board where you have men nowadays, which in my opinion, there's a loneliness epidemic with a lot of men, especially young men, where they don't really have a lot of optionality. So I think as far as this paradox of choice, in my opinion, I think it would be most likely geared towards young, attractive women. Right.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
When they're only swiping right on 5% of men, and men are swiping right on 60 to 80% of women.
Exactly.
You do have kind of this weird dynamic when actually in real life you would actually it would skew much differently.
Right.
But this is part of kind of like the psychological anxiety of theoretically having more options.
Right.
My grandparents grew up in a town of 300 people, and they seemed to make it work. I don't know how happy they really were on the back end, but I mean, that was their pool of choice. And I think nobody wants to have their choices limited, but just kind of like this theoretical optionality of there's got to be somebody better.
Yeah.
And then that kind of creates the dynamic. There's always two sides to a dynamic. So you do have this loneliness epidemic for many men, but that's because the women feel like they have unlimited options, especially for the beautiful ones. And then the men, the top 10% are, the choice is unlimited. So that's only one aspect. I wouldn't say that's the key feature of the dynamic, but that's definitely a play. And I think that causes a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, it's definitely one aspect, and it's a very interesting one because you gave the example of the small town that your parents grew up in, 300 people. So typically, say 30, 40 years ago, if you were an attractive young female living in that town, somebody there, the dentist or the doctor, or somebody would wife you up, and so to speak. But now, because with the access to social media and the amount of you can essentially just broadcast yourself, that attractive female has very high value men reaching out to her from Los Angeles, from New York, from Salt Lake City. And so why should she settle for, the local dentist, right? So the optionality for her increases. And so you create this paradox where the men their options are becoming less and less, and the attractive females' options are becoming more and more. So it's a super complex issue, I think, as far as a resolution to it, but it's something that definitely exists. Yeah. So,
for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. What other issues in dating do you see? So we were just talking about the optionality. What else do you think is very unique to this generation?
I think related to that issue is this idea of perfection, that somehow I need to be perfect to find a mate. I can be perfect in some way. I can position myself as perfect on a dating app if I take these beautiful photographs and filter them just right, and I've got to write the perfect script. It's this constant competition, and not only are you competing for the men and women in your small little town, but now you're competing for everybody. So now you've got to get more degrees. Now you've got to get better jobs and raise your value, for men, your ability to gather resources, for women, the beautiness, sexual value, sexual appeal value. So it's this constant drive of how do I make myself more marketable?
Kind of optimizing on sexual market value as opposed to the entire individual.
Yeah, I think, and something that we talk on our pod a lot about is some people that we've spoken to in some of the literature I'm reading is that they describe this as a sort of an evolution in technology, an evolution in culture, where these are just natural consequences of that evolution, right? Where now we have smartphones, and so of course people are going to have more optionality. But it seems like to me that there's an intent behind it, where there are groups of people that pushed for this type of, so to speak, degeneracy, where there's an eroding of family values, where there's an attack on God, attack on religion, attack on traditionality. And one of the ways that you do that is you try and disrupt the nuclear family. And the way that you disrupt the nuclear family is if you can create a technology that bases two people finding each other that might be compatible, right? One of the bases of tradition or religion is family, right? If you can disrupt that, if you can have two people that might be compatible not find each other and have it be more superficial, just sex and not long-term commitment and compatibility, then you can disrupt something that's very important and you can create a new type of society. So it's something that we talk about quite a bit, is that it seems like there's an intent behind it rather than just this natural evolution or consequence of the evolution of technology. What is your opinion on that? I'm curious.
I think that's a play. I think most people are probably, that's a consequence of unintended consequences. So there's something if you guys are game to talk about, limbic capitalism, the motivations of the attention economy and getting screen time from companies in Silicon Valley to get more usage, and the dating companies are driven by this as well. They want to keep their people on the app. So they're motivated. Their profit motive is driven by behaviors that are not necessarily good for the user. So I think a lot of people are not necessarily have evil intentions or specifically trying to destroy the family. So you've got that coming in with some key players who are in favor of destroying the nuclear family and are open to different structures in the family, polyamorous.
There's all kinds of
sexual liberation, everything that you're talking about. So I think you're getting all these factors coming in and creating this perfect storm of the dating mess that you kind of intro this in.
I mean, this kind of reminds me of your lecture that you sent over about dopamine, where you talk about how the tobacco companies moved from selling tobacco into food. And clearly that's about dopamine, but I mean, in my opinion, that's pretty nefarious.
It is. And I think if you ask the people, do you want to harm people? They would probably say no. But I think the drive for the profit motive overrides kind of even thinking about the welfare of the customer. It's interesting because trying to remember the film that was on Netflix was talking about the dangers of social media, that a lot of the creators of how social media was designed, they actually don't want their kids using social media. Steve Jobs didn't want his daughter using an iPad.
A lot of people at Facebook want all their children to use it. I mean, I almost think initially it was probably a good thing, but I think as they figured out they could get more eyes on their apps for a longer time, they just turned that knob up to draw them in and keep them in.
For me, it's really hard to believe that it's only profit driven.
I don't know. I don't think it's only, but
Okay.
I think you're getting at kind of a, like in politics. I think a lot of people are well-intentioned but misguided maybe in their approach, and then you get some nefarious people who really do have ulterior motives, and then you kind of get them, whether they're leading all the people that are kind of acting out of their what they think is right, and then you get some evil players in there. I definitely wouldn't cast everybody as having ulterior motives, but I think you're getting both involved.
So, for example, like pornography is free, right? And it's something that not only is it addictive, where it works upon, I think you talked about this in one of your lectures, where it works upon your dopaminergic loop reward system that we have, but it's also something that destroys you and disrupts you spiritually, right? And I gave an example of this previously, where in Gaza, when they first came to occupy the territory, one of the first things they did was broadcast pornography across the television stations. And they did that because they were fighting people that were essentially, they had principles that they believed in, that they were willing to die for. And so to really disrupt and defeat that type of enemy, you have to wage a spiritual war. And the way that you do that, the way that they did that, is through pornography. Because I think there's something to be said that pornography does, where it creates a distance between you and God. I think all of us have kind of felt a relationship with God where sometimes you feel closer, sometimes you feel more distant, that I think they're aware of. And at the same time, it's sort of, if you have principles that you believe in, if you have purpose, it diminishes that for whatever reason. So I think it's used as a spiritual weapon. That's why a lot of it's free. That's why it's very prevalent. That's why you see nudity and sex creep. Like in the early 90s when I grew up, every single sitcom that I used to watch, Full House or whatever, it was based on family and the dynamics and the problems that family faced, typically within a household, right? I mean, Brady Bunch, you name it. And then what happened somewhere in the early 2000s is that sort of shifted to where the family was no longer the focus, and it was
sitcoms like Friends.
I mean, where a traditional family, a man, children, and a wife, right? But then you have things like, if you think about like Seinfeld, if you think about it deeply, there's no children in that entire thing. Nobody's married. There are no children. And so it's very subtle, but if you actually think about it, it's doing a lot of disruption. Modern Family is another one where you have different sexualities and these different narratives that sort of brought in. So there's just a part of me that thinks that intent is a little more prevalent, a little more powerful than I think a lot of people give it credit.
I totally agree with you. I think in that case, you've got key players in Hollywood that are angling with an agenda of an anti-family agenda. I'm thinking of the producer of Seinfeld. I love Seinfeld, but it was like the epitome of
Larry David.
Dysfunctional individual behavior. They were talking about all the stupid reasons they would break up relationships. Somebody didn't use an exclamation point, or it was based around dysfunctional psychological. And
Friends is another one.
Yeah, for sure.
Sex and the City is another one.
Yeah.
All of these sitcoms, and the more you think about it, you're like, these are actually very different. And the other thing is like music videos. I remember I used to watch MTV and something called The Box, but they would actually blur out until about mid-2000. They would blur out women in bikinis, and they would show the women in bikinis after 10. But then slowly you'd have these music videos over the next few years and within that decade that would just get more and more raunchy and more. And now you see it creeping into Disney. You see sexual themes and nudity creeping into PG-13 movies. So I think the themes are becoming more extreme and nudity is creeping in more and more. And I think it's getting closer and closer to children, which I think is super scary. So part of me that's something I believe in wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I agree. I just it's hard to say everything is boiled down to that. Like I said, I kind of introed this with I think there's 50 forces at play. I would hate to like call out names, but I mean you're kind of speaking to the Hollywood values that culture has kind of imposed on.
Like porn, like why would you say it's free if it's such a powerful mechanism for profit?
Yeah, that's to get everybody involved, to get as many people hooked on the drug. I mean, it's like giving drugs out for free to get everybody, especially at young age. Almost every addictive substance, including social media, is introduced as young as possible. So Instagram kind of has had this limit of 13 years old, which has been easy to get around by lying about your age, creating an account. So you're getting 10, 11, 12-year-olds starting to use social media at such an early age. And Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation book was just published a few months ago, showing the mental health implications of introducing social media at such a young age. I think you're getting lots of limbic capitalism, ulterior motives. You're getting neurobiology used against us. When you talk about people want to drugify their product or service to get maximum use, they're tapping into the pleasure centers of our brain, playing into the dopaminergic centers to try to get us hooked at an early age so they can create users. I think it's interesting that software companies called the customers users, which is kind of an interesting thing. And the tobacco companies are applying all the lessons they learned in the tobacco industry into the food company industries, which are doing the same thing that now Silicon Valley has been doing for the last since 2010.
Do you think there's a way out of this? Going back to like the dating scene and that, where people are primarily using swipe-based dating apps. I have two questions there, but do you think we'll move beyond that, or do you think that's here forever?
Well, you're seeing a decline statistically in all the companies, virtually all the companies. Match companies, owns, I don't know how many companies you probably know.
44 dating apps.
Over 40.
And each one has a little different style, so they're covering their bases and they're trying to diversify so they don't take a hit. But I think especially Tinder and most of those swipe-based apps are on the decline because I think people are finally realizing I feel hollow after using these. I'm not making a connection. I think some do, but it's causing burnout, and I think you're seeing a reflexive response in a lot of areas. Even in pornography, one of the most search terms is "How do I quit using pornography?" So you're getting less alcohol use with Gen Z. You're getting less sexual first-time sexual behavior. That's the age is starting to creep up, so you're getting less sexual behavior. Movies, you're actually seeing a little less sex and nudity than there used to be.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So you're actually getting, and you're also seeing conservative religions are on the rise, and the quote-unquote nuns is kind of held steady for the last couple of years. So it's kind of going on this constant decline. And so now you're seeing, I'm not saying all of Gen Z, but you're seeing quite a wide swath that are kind of reacting to all the negative things that we're talking about.
So do you when you were talking about burnout and the dopamine, I guess it's the hit, the crest, and the trough, right? Is that when somebody experiences burnout, are they can no longer get the high off of that, or is it the low is so bad that they come off of that? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, a good way to think of it is to think of the dopamine baseline. So your brain is operating pretty much all hormones and all neurotransmitters at some kind of baseline. So you're going to, based on your behavior and the substances that you ingest or experience, you're going to go in an upward fashion, and then to create homeostasis, your body wants to bring it back to normal. So if you do some kind of normal behavior, like go to the gym, for example, or interact with people, you're going to rise in dopamine and then a slight decline But when you start using really powerful substances that have been drugified, the potency is increased. You're going to get a huge spike and then a fast fall. And then the more times you do that, your baseline for what your homeostasis at actually shifts. And so just to get back to feeling normal, you need more of that behavior or more of that substance. And so that kind of explains part of this burnout, where just normal behavior, normal everyday behavior that would normally bring you joy, like interacting with two friends would be pleasurable, is no longer stimulated anymore because I've used so much social media. I've been watching pornography, dating apps, playing video games, smoking weed. All those things are kind of shifting my dopamine baseline, so it's no longer at what it was before.
Why are these cycles always associated with like vice? These reward loops. Why is it gluttony, lust, gambling? Why is it always? I mean, give me a virtue that's associated with this reward loop.
I love that question. That's not one I'm totally prepared to answer, but that's a rabbit hole I'm willing to explore, and it depends on how good your editor skills are on whether I can think out of the box. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting. Rich Roll, if you're familiar with him, he's a podcaster that's been around for 5-10 years, and he's a recovering alcoholic, and his whole podcast is kind of around his recovery and bringing in guests to talk about things in relationship to addiction. And I listened to a podcast about a month or two ago about whether addiction can be on positive things as well, because he's turned to long distance running. But because of his background and maybe the way he's biologically designed, that's almost become a healthy addiction for him. And you can kind of see this with people, the way they eat, the way they work out. It becomes even workaholism is an addiction, but that's glamorized in our culture. It's like, oh well, they're bringing home the bacon, they're working hard, but that's actually kind of the same thing as what we're talking about with the vices. Is a culturally acceptable way to cover up difficult emotions. That's essentially what all these substances and behaviors are doing, is trying to cope with difficult emotions, usually around trauma, loneliness, depression, anxiety. Is what can I do? What can I take to feel normal? And so sometimes you're going to get the addictive behavior as a healthy coping mechanism. Some of those things, I don't think workaholism is necessarily healthy for somebody, but maybe the long distance runner is. So I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but
yeah, that makes sense. And that's very interesting.
I mean, even somebody could turn, religious worship into kind of a vice, where it becomes oppressive and it actually takes over the life in a non-healthy, non-balanced way.
I mean, I've experienced the runner's high, I guess you would call it, but doing a long distance, 10 miles or whatever, and it's not necessarily bad for you, but
I mean, is the same physiological processes evident in long distance running to somebody's passion? I want to call it passion more than addiction.
Yeah, I think that's why I said I'm not totally prepared to go there, because I think this is kind of a new idea that maybe there's positive addictive behaviors. But I mean, I think you guys kind of all, it resonated with you when I was talking about those examples. I mean, it's just not as common as these vices that you're talking about before.
Because I think something that the vices have in common is that they're very easy to do.
Yeah.
Like it's just like opening up your phone or playing video games or watching pornography. Like, but those other things require effort. They require discipline. Right. They require consistency, which not a lot of people have, right? But not a lot of people have that drive to have those things over and over to do them. So hard things take effort, but those vices are just really easy. And it seems like they're getting easier and easier to do. And that's what's kind of scary. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I'm curious. So you said you have 3 children, 2 adult children. What type of guidance do you give them when it comes to dating? Or do they not listen to dad?
Oh, they do, and they've almost listened to me and mom a little too much and it's surprising what they take in, even though they don't acknowledge it. That's a big question. I think one of the things that I've talked about in my lectures and with our kids is how do you pick somebody to date, and how do you find a good match if you are okay with me going that direction. Because we talked about perfectionism. One, a perfect partner doesn't exist, but you also don't want to settle either. So you're left with this kind of gray area. Well, how much effort do I need to put in to date to find a good match? And I came up with a model. I don't know if it's totally unique to me, but I call it the 70-30, where if you can find somebody that's got 70%, give or take, of what you really value, and the 30% is stuff that you would prefer, maybe not prefer, but they're not deal breakers, then that's probably a good enough match. What Barry Schwartz called satisfice, where you satisfy enough of your values and your minimum standards, but you're not continually chasing some utopian person out there that doesn't really exist, because you're essentially marrying a human, and all of us, there is no perfect person. Every one of us has trade-offs. So we have to figure out which trade-offs are we satisfied with. And so that's what that's one of the main pieces of advice we've given them, is look for people who have the same values you've got, things that really combine your interests, your values, the same worldview or similar worldview, but maybe they chew loudly, or maybe they are a night owl, or
They give you the ick. The ick.
well,
Yeah.
the ick may be a deal breaker. So
Yeah.
that falls outside of the 70-30, but
Do you, with that 70-30 rule, do you find that like women may have a higher number than men?
They do.
Like women require 80 to 90 versus a
do.
guy would get a 60 or 30?
yeah, I think women tend to be pickier by nature, and whether they've written it out or they've got it in the back of their mind, but they've got a checklist of, I want it 6'5", blue eyes, finance guy.
Yeah.
And that ends up kind of biting them in the butt later. And I think they realize, if they've reached a point in their life and they're like, well, why am I not finding what I'm looking for?
They're never going to find it.
But you also don't want to say, well, you got to settle. And it's hard to hear, well, you're being too picky. Well, you're like, well, if I can imagine, I see all these examples online. Why can't I have that? And so that's why I think this is something similar to the 70-30 mindset is helpful to go, okay, well, that's not a deal breaker. I don't love it, but I really do love all this other stuff about them. And are you guys familiar with the secretary problem?
No. Oh, what is that?
So I can't remember the book it was done in, but the idea is that if you were to hire a secretary for you in a workplace, how many people do you have to interview to find the perfect job candidate? Because assuming that once you interview them, you can't go back and hire them because presumably they've found another job. So it kind of recreates this dating scenario of, okay, we've got to fill the position. They're looking for other opportunities. So how many people do I have to date to find somebody that's good enough for this position? And so statistically, they said, okay, if you were to interview 100 people, say, for example, you would need to interview 37 people. And so if you got to this kind of theoretical point, and then you look back and go, okay, who was the best candidate in that whole interview pool? And then you said, okay, the next time we come across a person that's similar to that, that's who we're going to hire. Mm-hmm. So people like Logan Ury in the dating realm have kind of applied this to the dating realm of, there's a point at which you need to kind of play the field, be exposed to enough people to know what you want and what you don't want, but you're not looking for the perfect because it doesn't exist. So now you've set a standard, you've dated enough, and now you're able to kind of settle down with. And so that's not settling, and it's also not kind of striving for perfect. It's satisfying.
Well, in that scenario that you gave, there's another issue that comes up where the threshold for firing that secretary becomes lower and lower, right? So in dating, you could be in a relationship and come across an issue, right? And it could be something minor. And a lot of people don't get over that issue now just because it's a lot easier just to find somebody else than actually to rationalize and to talk through problems. And people don't really want to struggle in relationships anymore. Same thing with divorce. Divorce rates are up. Like, why do you want to stay with somebody that you've been with for 20 years when you can have your freedom, where you can explore and be with other people? So it just seems like we're letting go of those struggles that we have in our relationships, and that's creating another barrier. So,
I think that's a really, really good point. Of this kind of inability to cope with difficult things, difficult emotions, because everything that we talked about before, every business is going to find success if they can take away pain and make things easier. And so we've unintentionally created a society where you can pretty much take all your pains away, but in doing so, you make things really painful. And this plays out in the dating and relationship realm is, well, I can go find somebody else. And divorce laws have changed. Cultural acceptance of breakups have changed. So now I don't have to push through, have difficult conversations. I can just go find somebody else. But you end up finding, you kind of repeat the same patterns because you're half of that equation. It's not all their fault. So, but that's a great point that you bring up about, you take that checklist in, and then this assumption that I can find somebody that's not going to be the wrong way in any way. So then you just go in, and then you're going on a lot of first dates, and you're not willing to compromise. You're not willing to make things work in the long term.
I'm curious your opinion on. I don't know if you've heard of alpha widowed. It's a scenario where a woman either sleeps with or is in a short-term relationship with a very high-value man. And essentially that ruins her for future relationships. Because in her head, she has a hard time differentiating between a man that wants to sleep with her and the man that wants to commit long-term to her. And so once she's with that elite athlete or musician or surgeon,
whatever that is,
she's continuously going to be looking for him in other men. And other men aren't going to, the bar is too high, essentially. I'm curious what you think about that phenomenon.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So like the swipe-based apps kind of pump those top 5-10% guys and distribute the images to the women to keep them coming back to the app. And these guys don't really have an incentive to settle down with a woman. They have all the optionality, like the vast majority of women. I don't want to say the vast majority, but a much larger swath of women. And so that's what we're trying to explain is like your opinion on.
I guess if one of those guys swipes right on you and you have a conversation, you're going to have a harder time swiping right on another guy that doesn't seem like he has that
same value,
that same echelon of status that individual did. And the same thing goes in the physical realm when you're actually physically dating people.
Yeah, I think that's probably a short-term phenomenon where, I think we're just built to go after the most attractive person we could. But because dating apps in general are not complex and not deep enough, I think that's what you're trying to accomplish with your values-based app. Is women might pursue those kind of guys for a while and then find out they've got all the surface stuff, but not all the stuff that really resonates and the stuff that I really want in a relationship. So I think that is one of the problems with relying solely on online dating or dating apps is you have no real people to kind of compare them against. Whereas I think one of my daughters, for example, dates quite a bit. and is able to go, okay, yeah, they are attractive. They do earn a good income. They're very educated, but they also are missing emotional intelligence, spiritual values. I don't see them as the father of my children. So she's got enough people to compare them to and is not totally lured by that kind of deceptive pull. But I think if you're in a big enough city like New York or LA, I mean, I could see some really high value women and men being able to kind of play that game almost indefinitely.
Yeah.
But then they find themselves 40.
Exactly.
Past, now they can't have kids if they ever wanted to have
The
kids.
wall.
Yeah.
Call it the wall.
It's a good term.
Yeah.
And so I hopefully a lot of people figure that out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
That looks aren't everything. Income is not everything. And hopefully, we were talking about maybe Gen Z is kind of reacting in a positive way to some of these negative trends. I think as more and more people date in real life, hopefully we kind of see that, or they start using an app like Aura where it's based on other quality things.
Yeah, well, we call it relationship market value.
Yeah.
Like sexual market value is important. You need to be attracted to the person you're going to date and marry, right? Physically, but you also have to be attracted to them emotionally on multiple other factors.
Right.
And so we include sexual market value, but we focus on what we call, which is a bigger umbrella, relationship market value. So that's
And it's based on values, because that's what we've read.
No, I love that.
Really determines long-term compatibility in a relationship is shared values.
Yeah.
So you actually don't see the person's photo until you've chatted with them, for a few days. Trying to do something entirely different, because from our perspective, we think that this is what dating should have been. Online dating should have been. And I don't want to go back to intent, but if that intent wasn't there and people actually cared about two people coming together that were compatible and having children and having a family, dating would have been this way rather than basing it off of
appearance only.
Yeah, a mechanism that creates a sort of cesspool of one-night stands and superficiality. So we're doing something entirely different.
No, I love that. And I think you even see this on reality TV with kind of all the
Love is Blind.
Yeah, kind of disgusting reality shows. But then Love is Blind is kind of a response to that.
Yeah.
Can we build a connection without this visual appeal?
Yeah.
Well, I think people have caught on to I think there's kind of my opinion in looking at what's going on in our society is there's kind of a swing back to traditionalism a little bit. They've seen what hedonism has done, and it's given them nothing at the end of it. And now we're coming back into focusing on values and what really matters, what's going to bring the longest and most rewarding relationship is, relationships founded on values. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah. I still think the most powerful way you can meet somebody is in person, right? And the way that you're introduced to that person is very important too. I think the best way to be somebody that knows you the best in the world, your best friend, your parents, somebody found somebody, they know you, they know who you are, they know what your values are, and they find somebody that think would be compatible. They see something in them as far as their values, the way they look, the way they talk, and then they connect you to. So you're sort of introduced. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what our objective is with Aura, is to be that good friend or that family member that knows you, and then just looking at the values, trying to bring you together. So it's
almost like you're getting the benefits of arranged marriages.
Yes, exactly. I didn't want to say the word because of how I look, but so yeah, it is. Yeah.
Now there's actually they've done a couple studies talking about the satisfaction found in arranged marriages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it starts to reverse after 3 years, and it's all kind of built around expectations and what you kind of come into the relationship expecting.
Right.
And I think this culture that we've been talking about is built around too much expectations. And we want to get all our needs met by our spouse. We want to have the perfect spouse. And if we don't have that, then we can just find somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So I'm curious, women have their own unique problems in modern dating and men have theirs. What advice would you give to women? And then what advice would you give to men?
Great question. The first thing that comes to my mind is I'm seeing a lot of finger pointing of which sex is in the wrong. There's no good men out there. Women are too picky, and it's kind of following the same pattern as politics. It's always the other side's fault, as opposed to respecting each other's worlds and going, okay, you've got this to deal with, and you guys have this to deal with. How can we come together and kind of help each other navigate this world? I think advice to women is, I think the list is long on both sides, and I think they're kind of learning it. But the thing that comes to the top of my mind is how do you create an environment to welcome men to feel safe and asking you out? And if they do, how can you, and you don't want to go out with them, how can you help them feel good about stepping out of their comfort zone and maybe turning them down at the same time? I applaud you thanks for taking the courage. I know it takes a lot of guts, but I don't think it's a good fit, because I think, it's still traditionally, guys are doing most of the asking out, although it has shifted. So it's a little more equitable, but, I do think that is one thing women could do is maybe not so. I know with this whole Me Too movement, it's kind of like, don't film me in the gym, or I think women can do their part to still be welcoming and still have healthy boundaries, and so men are not so afraid to approach, and men maybe don't be so creepy, and then we won't that have problems. But you want guys to be willing to step out and go out of the comfort zone and feel like this is kind of a numbers game. I got to do my part. And I do think for men, there's a lot of advice to be had there, but unfortunately they're falling behind in what they can offer. And I think there is some valid points that women do make, that there's no good guys out there. But unfortunately, I think men are declining in college educations. It's about 60-40. So, which is fine if that doesn't work for you, but I think there's a lot of value that can be had in a college education. So I think they should pursue that. I think they should pursue emotional intelligence. That's kind of a standard trope, that men are not emotionally intelligent, and that's kind of the women's role. And I know there's kind of some difficult balance of women say they want me to share my emotions, but do they really? So kind of figuring out how do you provide a safe place for your spouse, but also being able to share your emotions and your challenges.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to talk about attachment style, but I think that message is learning your attachment style. And I can explain that if I don't know if you guys have talked about that before, but kind of both sides needing to, this is not a sex or gender thing, but an individual thing, is healing your attachment style, whether that's avoidant or anxious. And often women are, if I was to stereotype, women tend to be anxious and men tend to be avoidant. And now that women are becoming more and more independent, now you're getting more and more avoidant women, which then kind of creates anxious men, which is almost the worst kind of scenario. But that's just 2 points that I can think of.
No, those are great. Yeah, with regard to like college education, I think there's a principle, hypergamy, where these women are going to college, they're making a lot more than men. Well, that creates a unique problem, because a lot of women don't go into relationships with men that make a lot less than them.
Right.
So now that's another layer of complexity that you're throwing in there, another wrench, where these women, their pool of men that they can choose from is just becoming more and more limited. You throw in like a sort of a pop culture belief, like 6 foot and over. Now there's another wrench,
right,
to where their pool is just shrunk down to, just a handful of men, really. So it's just another layer, but there's just so many layers, and it seems like they're becoming more and more prevalent there's a lot of hopeless people, I think, in dating. So they're just removing themselves entirely. You have the rise of the incel. Yeah. You have a man that has just sort of accepted his destiny of being alone and not really trying to better himself mentally, physically, financially. And he's sort of just accepted to be in this World of Warcraft universe that doesn't really exist. So it's like, it's just wild that's coming into fruition. And with the introduction of AI and robots, God knows what the future is going to be, where the incel might have what he needs, right? Or I think
girlfriend.
Yeah,
that's a scary vision.
That is scary.
Yeah.
That's not a real relationship. It's almost servitude by a robot. You know what I mean? There's no give and take in a relationship.
Yeah.
Like there's no growth there.
Right.
Scary idea.
I think you referenced Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and that we're kind of heading maybe a mix between 1984 and Brave New World, where you have, again, my perspective, those people that want to have a mechanism of control over the people, but then there's that sort of pleasure mechanism that everybody's falling into.
I love that. Yeah.
Do you think? I mean, it's a fact that women tend to lean more liberal and men in this country tend to be more conservative. Do you think that's playing into why men and women aren't getting together? I mean, there's a myriad of other reasons, but do you think that has something to do with it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the 50 factors that we talked about. And I think that gender divide has been there for quite a while. But it seems to be amplifying with the younger sexes as of recently. I think you're getting the kind of the extreme right with Andrew Tate and
red pillish type stuff.
Yes, I don't want to put him in this boat, but there's kind of a movement to speak for underrepresented men. And now it's kind of almost like a reverse feminist movement of, okay, now men have been left behind. How do we bring them back up? So you're getting a lot of people I respect, and then you're getting the extreme version, and then I think you're getting a response to that. Whether it's chicken and egg and who started what, I think it's happening at the same time. But you're getting, I think it's largely based around abortion. What is often called women's right to choose.
Right.
That's a large part of the divide. I think that's kind of one of the core issues. I think that is explaining that and why females tend to be more liberal in general. But now you're getting, I think, with COVID, you were getting such bifurcation in political views within families and friend groups that you had people completely cutting off relationships with people they didn't agree with politically. And so now I think you're seeing that play out in the dating world of I can't respect you if you've got different worldviews, different political views.
Yeah.
That I do. I can't even go there with you.
Right.
And so you're just I think you're getting evil players, bad players that are kind of amplifying that difference. And you're getting social media influencers that are talking about that and representing a certain group that then kind of drive the forces even further.
Interesting. Yeah. I wanted to go back to Andrew Tate because you mentioned him. Where do you think that phenomenon of, I'm not going to call it toxic masculinity. I don't think it is. I think it's more hyper masculinity. Where do you think that sort of came from, where these figures have so much influence currently? I'll give you my perspective. Feminism is something that was so, it was so on the nose, so forthright, and you could call it toxic in a lot of ways. Our culture sort of leaned towards that direction very heavily in music, in pop culture, in movies, sitcoms. That you can kind of look at it through Hegel's dialectic, right? You have spirit, you have something coming in one direction, and then you have something that needs to match that in intensity coming from a different direction. Then you have synthesis. So it seemed like that sort of hypermasculinity was a response to the level and intensity of feminism that we saw through everything. And Andrew Tate is really just sort of manifest. He manifests that response. So I don't know if what your take is.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's I think this phenomenon of a pendulum swing that somehow in society we can't find nuance. We've always got to go to the extreme.
Right.
Maybe the nuance just never comes in the public eye, and the one that is the most extreme response is the one that gets all the attention, and that's probably what happened. Is Andrew Tate and that ilk is responding to a valid concern, and I think they're addressing and speaking to a lot of valid concerns and needs and representing a lot of men. But when it's not well thought out and you're talking to such a young crowd, you don't know how to discern truth from error and where is he going too far. And so you hear things and you're like, oh yeah, I totally identify with that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But then you kind of get mixed up with the entire message, and there's always unintended consequences. And just like feminism and the extreme, when you talk about third and fourth wave feminism, you're getting the same kind of version of this, this extreme version of masculinity.
Yeah.
And I think those are at the ends of the bell curve. I think you're getting most people in the middle. Maybe, it's kind of this unspoken illusion where because they're getting all the airtime, they think that's what everybody agrees. But it's kind of like what Nixon talked about with the silent majority. That's not in reality what's happening. It's most people are in the middle, but they think because they're getting all the airtime, that's what everybody thinks and agrees with, but that's not really what's happening.
Right. Oh, that's great. That's a great response. And we don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there any other topics you wanted to discuss or touch up on?
As far as dating in general?
No, it could be anything.
Yeah.
I think I do have hope. I think more and more people, when I polled students, and I probably at this point have polled maybe 800 students of do they even use dating apps? And there was only about 20 to 30% that were using swipe-based dating apps. So I think you're getting part of this. I would prefer something more organic, more values-based, more in-person. And I encourage them to supplement what they were doing, because then you're gonna reach people that you might not normally be introduced to. But if that becomes your whole world, I think that causes a lot of the problems that we're kind of leading into.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think learning to talk to people again, which social media combined with this kind of hyper anxiety of parents don't go outside and play. Ever since the 1980s when they had that show reporting a kidnapping,
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden kids are not doing free play anymore. Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this as well. And so you're getting more and more kids staying inside, playing video games, boredom, instead of just going out when we all grew up, when you just came home when it got dark.
Yeah.
And now people have kind of lost the skill of being able to interact with people, people that they're not, they don't already know. I would love to see more psychoeducation and more kind of implementation of these mental health strategies or relationship strategies, kind of on the things that our parents and grandparents never would have thought you would actually have to talk about, like, because it just happened on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
I would love to see that. And I actually have hope that people will get so burnt out on shallowness of what our society has become, that there will be kind of almost a counter revolution of going back to family values, seeing the value of religion and spirituality, the nuclear family, of not having digital devices. I think culturally I don't know if there'll be anything that, like, market wise, that can stem the tide of where we've gone. I do think, like in the pornography world, you're seeing some government measures checking age that will block access to pornography. I think that's a movement in the right direction. I don't tend to favor federal government interventions, but sometimes I'll just bring it up as a interesting point. In Australia, they said you had to be at least 16 to gain access to social media. I think that's kind of an interesting starting place. And I would love to see states kind of experiment with ways of providing good environments that would protect these vices from gaining a stronger foothold.
Right.
But I would like to see families, parents getting more educated around how to kind of navigate some of these issues. But part of the challenge is that things are changing so fast, and parents are busy earning a living, taking care of the house, that sometimes they don't even know what's going on with their youth.
Sure.
Like I speak almost a second language. I'm almost bilingual because I've learned Gen Z. I'm Gen X. I've learned how to speak that language, but I don't think most parents know what's going on. And, and my son is talking about this girl he's interested in. He's like, well, we're virtually talking right now. And so you guys know what that means, right? 10 years ago, you'd be like, what? Of course you're talking. No, talking is like a stage in a relationship. So it's parents taking the time to kind of get inside the kids' world, learn how to parent them, teach them the skills that maybe they had, or hopefully they had, or to learn. And I think another thing that would benefit the dating world would be for individuals to explore how to master their mind, all the dynamics, all the psychological forces that are at play. Maybe things that weren't intended to be passed on from our parents, or rejection and how to handle that, things that they picked up in school. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go to a therapist, but I do think everybody needs to figure out what part that they play in the relationship dynamics, instead of thinking everybody else out there is wrong. How can I improve myself? Because that's really the only thing that we can control is our circle of control instead of what we can influence and what we can't control, because that causes all sorts of anxiety, is trying to wait until I find the perfect match. It's, well, can I actually become the perfect person for somebody else? And can I attract the quality of person towards me?
That's great.
No, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And you talked about Gen Z. Me and DJ talk about Gen Z quite a bit. And I always say I'm very impressed with this generation. I think Gen X, millennials, they're the ones that sort of were roped into this more degenerate culture. And you have Gen Z that's rejecting all of that. You know, they're rejecting frivolous relationships. A lot of them are rejecting pornography. They're embracing more masculine, feminine dynamics in relationships, things like that. So I really think it's a remarkable, very unique, and they get this bad rap of being this frivolous TikTok generation, but I think they're a lot more. I think they're actually a pretty incredible generation. So that's really who we're focusing on.
I think that's great.
Yeah. So anything else you wanted to get through? We don't want to take too much of Spencer's time. I think we had a great discussion. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to go through, Spencer?
I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate it. Thanks for coming down.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
We appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Thanks. Awesome.